Hello, Serge here from the back porch. We have a question with Paul, beginning with some comments he's making about what's going on with his swing. And Paul says, I made good progress last year following Serge's teaching, but this year have developed an ugly hooking issue. I've been checking my grip, but have the urge to re-grip on the takeaway, and this results in closing the face on approaching the upswing. I've been trying everything I know, including trying to slow everything down. Any suggestions are appreciated. Thanks, Paul. Okay, Paul, let's differentiate between regripping and another thing we sometimes call milking the club. Regripping is you start with a grip, and at some time, either initially right before the takeaway, and sometimes it happens if you're holding it very lightly, and then when you start your takeaway, you sort of, that's when you set your grip pressure and you can regrip. And that's going to be either going like this, one hand goes stronger, or they both move, or whatever. And in many cases, when you regrip, it can open or shut the club. I think in many cases it tends to shut it more than, because as soon as you tighten it, it'll tend to flip the toe down and shut. Now, milking is a situation where someone stands there and they just kind of like, they're constantly just flapping their fingers around, letting them loose and opening down and just doing this, and that's not good either, because that becomes almost like a uncontrollable or unconscious act of doing this, and so how can you get into a steady point of starting your swing basically the same place, the same time, the same way every time? And we know that part of a good routine is you make your waggle or whatever else you do almost exactly the same every time. So a part of a good tempo and timing to starting your swing comes from once you walk in and you set the club down and you do your one or two little waggles or whatever, it's boom boom and you're gone. Because the longer you stand here and many times if you're milking the club or regripping, you're going to likely change your setup too, and change your feet move or whatever, which change your alignment, could make them wider, narrow, whatever. So none of those things are good. So the key is, I think, to walk in and once you finally set your grip pressure, you walk in there and you set your grip pressure. That's it. There's no more milking it. I'll never forget, at least for a personal story, when I first turned pro in 1973, I was playing in a Florida PGA winter event, and I ended up getting paired with a gentleman named Billy Maxwell. Billy's a former PGA teaching pro. He lives in Jacksonville, Florida, and he runs a golf course up there in Jacksonville. And he's a former PGA touring pro. Back in the 50s and 60s, he played, won 7 tournaments on the PGA Tour, won a U.S. Amateur before he turned pro. And at one time, he was a Wilson staff member, and he actually had, you can go check it, you could probably find it going way back. They actually made Billy Maxwell clubs back then when Samson Blue Ridges were the main ones, Billy Casper, and then they had Billy Maxwell's. And so he was fairly well known back then, and so when I found out I was playing with him, it's like, holy cow. One of my very first tournaments ever, and I'm playing with a former PGA Tour champion. And so I'm over there, and when I came down to the range, there was a spot right behind him, so I got in there, and a person I was with at the time introduced me to him. And so ends up I'm hitting balls right behind him. And back then I was a milker. I would just stand here and I just did this stuff. And I'm standing there one time getting ready to hit a ball, and I'm right here like this. And all of a sudden, if you can imagine my club still there, bam! I see a club come smack in there with the grip and smacks me right down just below my fingers here on the grip. And I mean, you talk about getting shocked. I just jumped up and came close to having a heart attack. And then here's Mr. Maxwell, and he's just I'm only 5'9", but he's shorter than me. He's standing there, and he puts the club right up underneath my nose, and he says, "Boy, I'm going to tell you one time and one time only." And he was from Texas, so he had a real Southern Texas drawl. And he goes, "I'm going to tell you one time and one time only. I don't want to ever, you hear me, boy? I don't want to ever see you milk that club again." He said, "That's no good. It causes nothing but trouble. So you hear me, boy? I don't want to ever see you do that again." I said, "Yes, sir." And I can promise you, Scout's honor, and I'm an Eagle Scout, I don't milk the club anymore. Since that day, because I couldn't do it the rest of that round because he was watching me. But milking the club and regripping is something you have to get rid of no matter what. Many times it happens because your grip is in the wrong place. You might have it in a place where you don't feel strong, and as you start to swing back, you regrip it. Or it happens, as I said earlier, just because you haven't set your grip pressure, and when you finally set it, it was so loose in your hands, when you finally grab the club, it can cause the club to twist in your hands. So let's go in, set our grip pressure during your routine, and get in there. And basically, once you get your feet down, I think you want 1 or 2. I like very small waggles, not big movements, because big movements can get the body moving too much and move out of position. And so step in there, make a couple small waggles, but have your grip pressure set. Boom, when you walk in, set it and keep it there, and then swing. And I think that's important, because the last thing we need is to start pretty good and let regripping or milking the club change our swing. And so because of the fact that we changed the club face. And sometimes it's just subtle, but all it takes is to go from a square club face and go 1 or 2 degrees closed, and now you have a pull. And then if you've been pulling a few times, then you have to start holding off and to stop the pull, and you get the fade. And vice versa if you happen to regrip and the club goes open. So set that club, set your grip pressure, and that's it. Don't ever let that muscle tone of the strength and the feeling of the muscles change in your setup. So we're going to say milking for the cows, not your golf club, and certainly not regripping. Okay, well, that's it for the search for today on this setup help that can hopefully eliminate a lot of problems because of changing your setup that you started when you first walked into the ball. Well, that's it for today, and I'll be talking to y'all again soon.